the age of the psychedelics, 1970s. David Bowie and the Starman, in response to the astronauts of NASA walking on the moon in '69, I think the whole world was affected by the conquest. And David Bowie made an impression on my little planet. Even though we were in South Africa by the end of '71, '72 he released Ziggy Stardust, and I fortunately had a very impressionable big brother who was 15 at the time, 16, and he managed to get his hands on the album. I think we could actually buy records. I don't know how he got them, but Starman and Life on Mars and Major Tom, all, I mean, I was 6 at the time, and it definitely did sink into my body. Although David Bowie himself could be a bit depressing. Some of his music's a bit dark, even in the later years. Although I did manage to see him live. I saw him live in '87, and by that time he was doing his popular Let's Dance album, which was more poppy than the psychedelic and trying to prove a point. He'd been through his androgynous kind of bi kind of phase. Well, so he said publicly, but we don't know what went on privately. And his music evolved. He was always a very theatrical person. He musically, I think he was aware that his voice wasn't like the Cliff Richard quality of yesterday, or you know, but he sang songs that suited his voice and his timbre and his performance and his act. And he was the first really big name to kind of experiment with makeup, the androgynous feel. Then he married Angie Bowie, and they had a kid called Zoe, which he ended up changing to Duncan. And you know, as a child, I remember being very taken by the photos, the very few photos that we'd see in the music magazines. But the album cover, the art of the LP album covers, that the albums of Yes, Genesis, where it was all this detail and psychedelics, really fitted in with my kind of fairy, imaginative psyche at the time. And even though I didn't probably understand half of the music, the psychedelic, the art, obviously impressioned me, because now here I am, many years later, playing with it. And his David Bowie and his Major Tom took me out of space. It took me out into orbit, took me into that countdown, commencing countdown, and it gave me an idea of, I just say goodbye to your family, and you don't know if you're going to come back, you know, into this spaceship and into this rocket. And I think ultimately, he was such a pioneer and artist, paving the way for a lot of the new romantic music, which comes later. But, you know, men wearing makeup in the '70s when the Vietnam War was happening, and, you know, the world was still kind of waking up from the conformity and the fear. And the youngsters of that time, and the free love of the '60s and the psychedelics of the '70s, they had a lot to rebel against. And I think nowadays youth don't have as much to rebel against. Yes, we're talking about names and genders and stuff, but these pioneers, David Bowie, and he wore a dress for most of his Stardust album. He would go out, and when I was looking up his research, he says eventually that personality he kept off camera. So, you know, eventually the Ziggy Stardust character became nasty and evil, and it was almost like David was kind of possessed. That's what he was saying. He says eventually he had to cut ties with Ziggy Stardust, and I think for a long time he didn't want to even play the music at his concerts because of the persona that had kind of swallowed him or enveloped him. And that was quite fascinating. I thought, you know, as an artist, as a actress, as an actor, I've read of many people getting swallowed up by their character, and you know, to shrug it off when they go home. And for 5 years he played Ziggy Stardust, and now I'm trying to do him testimony because it imprinted on my psyche, except I can take mine off.